Good evening, everyone. Can everyone hear me? Yes. No? Really? Oh, okay. It is? All right. Well, my name is Tazeen Ahmed. Can you hear me now? Yes. And I am the president of the Montgomery County Women's Democratic Club. And thank you all for coming. It's just such a pleasure to have you all here to join this really important conversation. This evening, I have the distinct honor and privilege of welcoming renowned historian and scholar Heather Cox Richardson. And so many of us know her for her nightly newsletters, Letter from an American, and her Facebook Lives. I know I read that like around 3 in the morning when I typically wake up. It's always in my inbox, which is wonderful. And we rely on her for framing current events with an historical perspective. She's published many books, including Democracy Awakening, which is a must-read, and Notes on the State of America, which can be found at your favorite bookstores. She's one of the most compelling voices in contemporary history writing, and she's beloved by so many, and like everyone in this room as well. And just a little side note, this event, I think, sold out within 2 weeks of us posting it online. The tickets went out so fast. So please join me in welcoming Heather Cox Richardson.
It is such a pleasure to be here at the club that has been causing good trouble since 1956, and to be here with you again. To talk. So let's take it away.
Sure. So before we dive into today's program, and I know you want to hear from Heather, but I want to just take a little time to talk about the Women's Democratic Club. Like Heather said, we've been here close to 70 years, and it's a membership organization of politically active women and men, so please remember that. People assume that we've got women in our name, so we're only women, but we're not. We've got women and men in our club, a lot of elected officials. And the work we do is to advance democratic policy priorities and elect Democrats up and down the ballot. Our mission is not only to educate voters on key local, state, and federal issues, but also to focus on issues that disproportionately affect women and their families. If you're a member, thank you. How many members do we have in the room? I'd like to hear some clapping for that. But clearly we have a lot of non-members, so please, you should consider looking at our club and consider joining. We have great programs. It's $30 membership for the whole year. I don't think you can get a better deal than that. And you'll hear about all of our events coming up. So at the Women's Democratic Club, we're committed to bringing you important events, and we do happy hours with a purpose. We do candidate forums, we do community dialogues, and we do a lot of advocacy and speaker events like today's program. Our work is focused on amplifying the voices and tackling issues that matter most to our community, and we welcome you to join us by volunteering, attending events, engaging in our advocacy efforts, and sharing information to spread the word about our initiatives. As many of you know, we have a really strong advocacy program that focuses on issues that disproportionately affect women and their families, but whether it's advocating for affordable housing, healthcare, education, economic opportunities, environmental protections, or fighting to save our democracy, WDC is a force of change. And we fight to uphold values of equality, justice, and opportunity for all. So if there's an issue that you're passionate about, that we're working on, please come and join us. And if there's something you really want us to be looking at, we would love to talk to you about it and love to collaborate and do more on issues that are important to you. So upcoming events, just a couple that I want to highlight for you. And And as many of you are now going to join and become members, you should know about them. On May 14th, we'll be hosting a happy hour with a purpose. And it's going to be at Citizens on Culture in Silver Spring, featuring Caitlin Durkovich, who was served on the National Security Council in the Biden administration. And then on 10th, we have our biannual meeting and elections. And we will have it at the Women's Club of Chevy Chase. And we have Maryland Attorney General Anthony Brown is going to be one of our, is a confirmed speaker. And we have a couple other surprise guests for you. So please consider joining us on June 10th for that. So finally, I just want to take a minute to just recognize our board. I know you saw us all standing earlier, but if you would, all of the members of the board, just take a minute and stand up. These women do the work. So they are why we have so many events and can bring these events to you, because they're doing the work behind the scenes all the time. And finally, I want to thank and recognize our newest class of vulnerable populations, our federal workers, who are working to keep the government working for us. Do we have federal workers in the House? Thank you all for your service. So now let's turn to what you came to hear tonight. We want to hear from Heather. Heather, thank you so much for joining us this evening. We're so excited to have you here.
It's such a pleasure.
Thank you. So as I sit here, I'm reminded of a quote by James Baldwin, in which he said, "Not everything that is faced can be changed, but nothing can be changed until it's faced." And your nightly newsletter helps us face what's really happening. I mean, it really does, give us a very clear picture every night of what happened in those days, that day event. And you help us filter some of the noise out of what's happening right now. So thank you for that. So my first question is going to be about an article that was in the Washington Post today. And I know there seems to be something every day. It's insane. But today's article talked about that the FBI arrested a Wisconsin judge and charged her with obstructing an immigration case. Can you comment on what that means for the judiciary going forward, and what do you think the Supreme Court might their take might be on this?
So it is too early to have read. I actually, Buddy and I went to the Library of Congress today, so I've only skimmed the news. It is too early for me to comment on the complaint itself because I haven't read it. I have read commentary on it. And I'm going to say something a little bit different than you'd hear, I think, elsewhere, and that's that this is, of course, an enormous attack on the judiciary. But this is not news that we've had these extraordinary attacks on the judiciary. It is interesting that the story came out today, today is the 24th? 25th?
25th.
25th of April. The arrest was on the 18th, a week ago. And she was, and I don't remember where the case is. Something happened in it today. The judge, has said that she looks forward to being completely exonerated. And the commentary I have read from lawyers suggests that that's indeed the case, that from what I have seen, she asked the agents for a criminal warrant, and they did not have one. They had a civil administrative warrant, and while they were trying to sort that out, she let the guy go into the hallway, and that's where ICE picked him up. Now, don't quote that because, as I say, I haven't really read the complaints myself yet, but think about what happened today. So we hear this first thing in the morning, and some expletives might have come from certain people on this stage because my fabulous copy editor is here with me today. And she and I finished the letter this morning at 4:30. And those nights are terrible. They're terrible. And I'm thinking, I could maybe post a picture tomorrow night. And I picked up my phone, and I'm like, really? Like, really? The first thing I see is Kash Patel. The first thing I see, and I'm like, come on. But think about it. It's Friday, right? So think about the logistics of that. They drop that first thing on a Friday morning. If you're trying to hide things, you drop it after the news. You do the Friday night news dump. And we've gotten a lot of Friday night news dumps coming. It's in the last 3 months. But But the fact they dropped it first thing in the morning, and the first thing I saw was that long thing from Kash Patel, which he then took down and then he put back up. And I don't know if you were watching, but Pam Bondi promptly went onto the Fox News channel and launched a full-out attack on the American judiciary. She's the Attorney General. She's supposed to represent the American people, not Trump, and she's acting as Trump's advocate. So let's think about what's happening with that. Now, the other story that dropped today, which you're probably not going to see a lot about because it got covered up by this story, was Trump's interview in Time magazine. Did you see this? You know, so listen, y'all didn't see it because you were, but the Time magazine interview, he came across, you know, I said before the election his brain was tapioca. Now his brain is, I mean, it's just, yes, did someone say curdled tapioca? So, and what I mean by that is if you read this, he basically said he didn't understand much of what was going on in his administration. He said that he's made 200 trade deals, and you know, China is out there saying, you haven't talked to us. U.S. News and World Report had a wonderful title today saying, he said, she said, which has to win the best title of the year. But so I'm looking at this whole picture, and so now you don't need to read tonight's letter, because this is what I'm going to write about unless something happens while we're sitting here. This is a big deal. What they have done is a big deal. But they instantly went to the media to talk about it. Now, why would they do that? Because Trump is under freaking water on everything, including immigration. So now they're sort of coming back and saying, yeah, we're really going to go after those judges, which plays to their base with luck. I think that's what they're hoping. But I'm looking at this and I'm thinking, if I'm a member of that administration that is determined to put my wishes into place, especially over immigration, I'm going to grab as much power as I can right now before all the people who are furious about the tariffs and are furious about the attacks on undocumented immigrants, as well as Kilmar Abrego Garcia, who's become a huge deal. The way the Trump administration has handled that is enormously unpopular, not only among Democrats, but also independents and Republicans who are upset about that. I'm going to grab as much power as I possibly can, make as big as a splash as I can, and see how far I can run this out before everything falls apart. Because at this point, it's not looking good on the everything falls apart scene. So it's terrible. There's going to be a lot of pushback. Trump lost on a number of legal fronts today. He's backed off on a number of things today because of the things that have happened. But I'm not sure that you can understand that without looking at that Time interview and the polls that say they must do something dramatic and grab as much power as they can because it seems to be slipping away. So that was probably more than you wanted to know about that. But I'm not sure. I mean, we don't know. But absolutely, advocacy on that issue is a biggie, but recognition that in every level this administration is crumbling is also important, because those are buttons to push too.
Thank you. It's incredibly important, and obviously we're really concerned about what they're doing with the courts. So given the tumultuous nature of American politics right now, do you see a historical precedence that gives you hope or makes you particularly concerned about where we are?
I'm saying, did you say the courts again, or the?
No. I'm just talking about the nature of politics right now.
The nature of politics. Because I didn't answer your question about what the Supreme Court would do about these attacks. Do you want to know the answer to that?
Yes.
So one of the things to remember when you do American politics, or anything, is that it's a constantly moving target. And it's a terrible mistake to look at what somebody did even a year ago and say that's who they are, because they're constantly changing. And I notice this a lot when we talk about, well, never mind, that's something else. It's worth recognizing that stuff is changing. And the Supreme Court has itself a really big problem right now. And that's that the president whom they have empowered with Donald J. Trump versus U.S. on July 1st, 2024, has taken what they said in that about him not being able to be prosecuted for things within his Article 2 powers. That's in the Constitution. First, we have Article 1, which is Congress, and then Article 2, which is the president, which enumerates the rights and the powers that they have under those two things. So one of the things that the Supreme Court said is that, the president gets away with virtually anything under Article 2 powers, and in Article 2 powers are relations with foreign countries. That's why he's throwing people over into other countries and saying, hey, this is my prerogative. Well, that's going to get old real fast. And the Supreme Court then has the problem that as Trump is destroying the independence of Congress, if he gets away with that, does he need the court? And if you're in the Supreme Court and you want to protect your prerogatives in the Supreme Court, now you've got yourself a real problem because you're trying to protect the rights of the court as well, at the same time that you're watching this president whom you have empowered stomp on everything. And it's interesting that in one of the recent cases, it was Alito and Thomas who dissented, but all the other justices said, no, we've got to rein this guy in. So how they would approach this attack on the judiciary, they're going to let it run through the courts, and it's probably going to stop immediately. It's entirely likely that this will die through the normal legal channels, and then they don't have to deal with it. But I think, again, it's a mistake to look at this court and say they're going to rubber stamp everything Trump does, because that's not what they said in Trump v. U.S. They said that they're the ones who get to decide what is an Article 2 power, and it's pretty clear they don't think taking individuals and tossing them into another country and saying, I can't do anything, is an Article 2 power. And they're probably not going to be real keen on attacks on the judiciary because last I checked, they were part of the judiciary. So we'll see. I'm not going to predict what they're going to do, but they are not the same Supreme Court they were a year ago, even though there's the same Supreme Court they were a year ago. But they're not the same Supreme Court they were a year ago. And you asked then about...
Just about the nature of American politics right now. Is there like a historical precedence of what we're seeing now? Is there something in history that that has similar to this?
No, and that's both terrifying and an extraordinary opportunity. And that's worth remembering. What we have in this moment is a president and an administration that is actively trying to destroy our Constitution. We have never had that before. And they're doing it by trying to act outside the Constitution. So it's not that they're just breaking laws. Like, we've had a lot of presidents who break laws. But they are acting as if the Constitution doesn't exist. They're extra-constitutionally behaving, which is one of the reasons it's so hard to chase them and catch them, is because the Constitution was not designed for a president to say, I'm just going to bring in this guy over here and let him run the country. You're like, you can't do that. That's not part of the Constitution. And he's like, well, I did it. And that makes it really hard to grapple with what's going on. And we've never had that before. But we have had in the United States periods in which we did not have a democracy. We could go through this, throughout our entire history, but most dramatically in the American South from about 1874 to 1965, it was a one-party state. We had elections, but everybody knew who was going to win them. And we did not have the rule of law, either for Black Americans or for white Americans who were not part of that ruling caste. And, we got out of that in that moment. So there are ways in which we can grapple with where we have been by looking at that period. And then, of course, we also had the 1850s and the 1860s when a small group of elite enslavers tried to take over the government, but when they couldn't, they took their marbles and went home. And we now have those people taking over the federal government. And that's kind of where we are right now. And that's it bothers me a little bit that people don't recognize the real stress of the Biden administration under what was itself a novel situation where the last president didn't go away. I mean, presidents always go away, and he stood there fighting constantly. And it was as if the Confederates had stayed in Washington. And instead now we have the Confederates having taken over Washington.
It's very frightening where we are right now. So your work often draws a straight line between events in the past and the current political events that are happening. How do you decide which historical parallels are most important to highlight at any given moment?
That's a great question. I don't think about it a lot because I'm a historian and we study how societies change. That's literally how we are trained. I am not a journalist. I was not trained as a journalist. I was trained as a historian, and there's actually a discipline of history, and we learn how to do research and evaluate sources in order to decide how we think in a specific moment history changed. And then, especially in Europe, they study a lot about how if you look at how societies change, you can make theories about them. Americanists tend to be less theoretical than Europeanists because of the way we're trained, but we do look to see how societies change. So, for example, one of the things that interests me right now is the rise of new media. Well, trained as I am to think about how new media has at times changed history, I sit there and say 1850s and the 1890s. Because, and then you could expand that and say 1920s, because you get radio. But you look at the moments that in that history say to you, or in that your theoretical understanding, that look the same. And that's just kind of the water I swim in. So I don't think about it a lot. I do know that I get tired of making the same comparisons all the time. So I'm often searching for something else to talk about. And let me tell you, you guys did not like Martin Van Buren. I was like, this is great. I've never written about Martin Van Buren. They're gonna love this. And people are like, so no, I get like thousands of letters a day. I got 2 for Martin Van Buren. But he was really interesting. Would you like to know about him?
That's okay. So, thank you for that. So, I'm going to go back to a little bit about the system, the two-party system we have right now. Could you give us some perspective on why you think the Founding Fathers decided to do the two-party system as opposed to the parliamentary system?
Well, there was this guy named Martin Van Buren. This is actually one of the reasons we're in the problem we're in the place we're in, is the framers of the Constitution did not believe in parties. They did not think we would have a party system. They thought, if you read Federalist Number 10, Madison's Federalist Number 10, as I'm sure you do every night, he talks about factions, right, and the importance of factions. He means parties. Like, factions means something different now. The idea of faction was party in that period. And he talks about the evils of factions, but he means parties. And what they believed was that because the former colonists had rebelled to create this new system of self-government, they would all be on the same page. They might disagree about policies, but they would not develop into the kinds of factions or parties that had developed in England. And for the kind of governments that we have in the modern world, the development of parties is really important in England, because if you think about it, until we get the concept of political parties and the loyal opposition, if you disagreed with the king, you were lucky to walk away with your head. So the idea that you could actually still be a member of society in good standing and disagree with your sovereign is a really important change in governance. And if you've heard of Bolingbroke, this is why he's important. I mean, maybe other reasons too, but this is what he does, is he says, we can love the country and not like what the king is doing. So the Americans think, well, we did that, we all agree now. And they discover very quickly that that's not how the system works. And we see this again, by the way, with the Confederacy, which believes it's not going to have parties either. And what you end up with in the Confederacy is Jefferson Davis, and then everybody's sniping at Jefferson Davis. And that's one of the things that brings the Confederacy down. But so they don't think they're going to have it. And it develops it develops during George Washington's administration. One of the reasons I don't like Thomas Jefferson is because he kept going to George Washington saying, there are these people, and they are starting parties, and this is so terrible, and I just think this is so awful. Well, who was starting the party? Thomas Jefferson. And he was always sneaking around, that guy. But so when they wrote the Constitution, they did not expect there to be parties. So they thought that the country was going to be big enough that people would divide into factions. And that's the same, into what we think of as factions. I use that word in two ways, into little groups, so that we might, as somebody said to me, it's like a faculty meeting. If you're in a really small campus, people divide half and half. But if you're if you only have like 7 faculty members or 8 faculty members, it's half and half. If you have 150, there's not us versus them. You might all agree that you like this dean or that you want to change the curriculum that way, but then you're not going to agree on whether or not you're going to change the curriculum to accommodate, athletes. I mean, people, end up in different groups. That's what they thought was going to happen. And so when they put safeguards in the Constitution for situations like the one we're in now, they did not take into consideration that you could have a group of senators who were so committed to their party that they would put it above the country. And if you think of where we are now in the impeachment of Donald Trump in 2019, according to Ted Cruz, he gave an interview in which he said that it might not have been an interview, it might have been a memo, but which he said all of the Republican senators believed that Donald Trump was guilty of what had been charged against him. And if you remember, they were so upset at how poor his defense was that a number of senators started helping, which they absolutely were not supposed to be able to do, especially Lindsey Graham started helping. But Mitch McConnell, who is a senator from Kentucky, convinced them that it was not about impeachment, it was about the 2020 election. And they couldn't go into the 2020 election that way, and he did the same thing the second time around. If they had done what they were supposed to do in 2019, when the vote came in 2020, we wouldn't be where we are, and they wouldn't be where they are, which is one of the reasons that I keep saying we got to really emphasize holding to the law and the Constitution, because you don't know what's going to happen. Mitch McConnell kept making the calculation that Trump was going to go away, and it did not work.
Clearly did not work. And I've just recently heard you talking about due process and how there's a lack of due process and what the implications of that are for all of us here. Do you want to talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, it's funny how many people don't understand due process. And what that means is that we have the right not to be arrested without being charged. And you're, I think, a pretty well-educated audience, so you probably know all this stuff. But if the government arrests you, it has to charge you. And if it doesn't, your lawyers can get the body back, can get you back. Habeas corpus, that's, if you hear that, the writ of habeas corpus, that's what that is. And once charged, you crucially have the right to be considered not guilty or innocent, although that's actually not the same as not guilty, just being a little theologian here. You are considered not guilty until the government proves its case against you. So even if the jury thinks you probably are guilty, if the government does not prove its case, you walk. The burden is on the government, not on you. And then if, in fact, it goes to trial, which a lot of cases don't nowadays, only about 2 to 3% of criminal cases go to trial these days, which is a problem. A lot of people think it's a problem and are working to correct that. You get to present evidence, you get to have witnesses, and as of the 1960s, I think, you get to have a lawyer provided to you if you can't afford one. And then you have a right to a jury trial to decide whether or not, a jury of your peers, by the way, a lot of our civil rights laws rest in who is a peer, and those are rights that people have so they don't get snatched off the street and, sent to a terrorist prison in a third country. And that is, we just sort of assume that it's there, and if you don't know it's there, you maybe don't understand why this is such a big deal. I will say I'm fascinated in this moment by how many MAGAs are upset, or Republicans at least, are upset about Abrego Garcia. And I've had to think a lot about that because they're really upset about it. And I think it's because people who have been perhaps close to the wrong side of the law themselves recognize how important it is that whoever the judge or person was, not judge, whoever the arresting officer was in their case had to follow the law. And I was talking to somebody about this recently, and she said, in fact, she was a criminal defense attorney, and she said, in fact, it's rural areas that those protections really matter, because in urban areas, the police officers are so busy with perhaps more violent crime or more visible crime than in rural areas, that it's in rural areas where a constable or a sheriff or a police officer who's got a lot of time on his hands might harass people. And so that's something that perhaps they are more attuned to. But I was shocked if you watch these videos where they're having these town halls, and they're screaming at Chuck Grassley in Iowa, "You're going to bring that guy back." And they're all screaming that, and I'm thinking, I'm sorry, that's Chuck Grassley in Iowa. But so you think about it, and it does make sense. But it's on paper, it's not something that I would have seen. But they understand that due process matters in a way that people who maybe have less truck with police officers don't.
And I just want to give a shout out to everyone from Maryland who's here for our senator, Chris Van Hollen. And as you all know, he brought this issue very much in the national eye, so his trip there meant a lot to a lot of people.
Yeah, can I just jump on that?
Sure.
Have you all seen that, because it came out today, that the Trump administration, first, when they knew that they had wrongly taken Abrego Garcia, had thought they would just get him back. And then they realized they could make it a political thing. And that's when they turned it into the idea of really hyping the idea that he is a member of MS-13 and so on and so forth, which is itself really interesting, because part of that deal was to return MS-13 people to El Salvador, because they have a deal with Nayib Bukele to sort of manage El Salvador together. So they were actually getting some of those MS-13 members back to El Salvador because Bukele wanted them back. But I don't know if you've seen the Photoshop picture with the MS-13. I'm like, honest to God, I could do a better job than that. And that's saying, I looked at it and I thought, somebody typed on that photograph. And then I'm like, oh my God, it's not satire, you know? But that, I think, says something about the judge case of today, that they see this as a political thing they can make hay with.
And that's what they've been doing with everything, right? Everything has become this political thing, and the misinformation is just astounding. I mean, it's just blatant lies that they are telling. So I'm curious, and for you, like, what do you feel is the role of historians or public intellectuals? What role do they play in combating this misinformation and this revisionist narratives that are just they're putting out there every day?
You know, I'm not sure that historians have that much of a different role than any of us. That is, the United States of America is founded on the Enlightenment principles that if you do research and if you find evidence, you can make arguments about the way the world works, and people can choose the ones that seem to them that they discern are the accurate ones. Now, we're not 100% accurate, of course, but the idea of having a fact-based society that can discern the right rules for organizing society, the right laws, for example, and can figure out how people can live together is central to American democracy. But the whole point of disinformation, which is different than misinformation. Misinformation is you screw up and you put Chris Van Hollen in Delaware. And then you say, oopsie poopsie, he's from Maryland. And you fix it. That happens. Disinformation is you're deliberately confusing what's happening. And that is obviously what we're dealing with in this country. Not only the lies, and I'm fascinated in a way by the lies, because both Pam Bondi, but especially Caroline Leavitt, are, but think about that. But isn't it interesting, though? Like, if you look at that, she's very young. And I mean, I don't know anything about her except the obvious. But like, how do you think that it's okay to get up there and say that this man who has never been charged with a crime is a human trafficker to the world, and then to let their home address out so his wife and 3 disabled children have to? I mean, I'm fascinated with the way people think, and I don't know how you get there. I truly don't. So there's the lies, but then there's also the flooding of the zone. And that is an attempt to make it so people give up. I don't know what's happening. I can't know what's happening. I quit. They're all corrupt. And one of the things that historians can do, but that everybody can do, is say, no, that's not what happened. And I'm sorry to pick on Mr. Abrego Garcia again, but he is not a member of MS-13 any more than you and I are, at least according to the evidence that we have. And I don't even know the full name of the gang. So we're pretty safe, probably. And to really push back on those things and to say that's not actually what happened. One of the things that I have found interesting, I do read usually Fox News. I tend not to watch it because of my blood pressure. But recently there was a thing where, after the terrible, terrible storms that have swept across the lower 48, which barely made the news, lots of people died, by the way, Arkansas was crunched. And I was reading the news, the Fox News website, and they were talking about how Donald Trump had declared, he had mobilized the National Guard in Arkansas to take care of the storms and to take care of the damage. And everyone's like, yeah, he did it. Biden never showed up for anything. He did it. And I'm looking at that going, he can't do that. Like, that's not part of the way the system works. So I'm reading through it and I'm thinking, this just can't be right. So I go to the Arkansas papers, and indeed it was the governor of Arkansas, Sarah Huckabee Sanders, who mobilized the National Guard. And somebody actually I kept reading the Fox thing, and somebody actually put, well, actually, I think that was the governor who did that. And they said, no, they changed the law, so Trump did it. And then, but what jumps out to me is yesterday, and I won't write about this because I won't have room for it, but yesterday, I think I've lost track of the days. Recently, Sarah Huckabee Sanders asked Donald Trump to declare a national emergency in Arkansas. And Trump said, no, you don't need it. And I thought, that would be good information for ordinary, because I almost started to write back on the Fox News channel, and then I'm like, oh man, that is such a bad decision for someone with my name. But that's the sort of thing that somebody could just go on there and say, it was Sarah Huckabee Sanders. She's a Republican. I mean, she's a MAGA. So it's not like you're saying, no, it was, somebody, Gavin Newsom, that's right. But also to say, Arkansas is not all that help he promised North Carolina and Arkansas, also Arkansas, not happening, and that kind of thing could poke holes in the bubble, because the only way to combat the disinformation is to put good information out there and make sure more and more of us know it.
Thank you, and that's really important. I think a lot of us, it's important for all of us to be doing that. And like Heather said, it's not just historians or, political commentators. I think each one of us has that responsibility to put that information out there. One thing I just wanted to stop for a second. Do we have an extra handheld available to us? Maybe? The reason I'm asking is what I think we'll do is I'll ask a couple more questions and then maybe give the audience a chance to ask a few questions. And Padmata, can you hold the mic and we'll bring people up so think about it. Don't all rush the stage, but we'll have some time because we're going to wrap up by 8, but we'll have some time. So we're just checking to see if they've got another handheld. So just to go on, so I'm interested to know what book, historical figure, or even a specific moment in history that might have shaped your way of thinking in a really profound way?
That one was easy. So, I guess I haven't written about this. I've spoken about it before. I was not a good student in college. I got great grades, but I hated the regimentation of it. So, honest to God, when I was a graduate student, I was TAing for my advisor, and as you TA, you have to go to class. And when we went, well, you know where this is going. So when we got to write the midterm that year, we sat down to write the midterm, all the TAs and I got together, and everybody came up with questions, and I looked at them, I said, this is a terrible test. If you've been to class, you know all the answers. And they were like, that's kind of the point. And I was like, I honest to God had no idea. I thought you were supposed to read the books on the list and then go to the library and learn more about it. And then if you could sit still long enough to sit in a classroom, that was great. But for the most part, you were better off learning on your own. And then the exams were fun. They were like a challenge. Did you read the right stuff? So all that being said, I hated college and all that stuff. And so I was, it was, my parents, rest their souls, kept me in by begging me, they could just please finish. And then, then we can consider our job done, but just please finish. And so I must have been a junior in college. And I was taking class with a man who became my advisor, David Donald, won a couple of Pulitzer Prizes. And I loved him. I sat in his classes, but most of them. But we had to write a paper, a fairly long paper, 25 pages or something paper on something. It was a Civil War class. And I was like, I don't know what I want to write about. So they had told us where we could find sources. And I got up one morning and I don't eat breakfast, and I went to start doing research. And the way you read newspapers at the time was by going into the basement. It was called Government Documents. It was at Harvard. And it's cold. You had to go down this long, it's underground because they are trying to keep it protected because there's microfilm and all stuff and good stuff down there. So I went down and I didn't eat and it was cold. And I started to read the Chicago Tribune thinking there's got to be something in here, right? So I started at the beginning of the war. I started before the firing on Fort Sumter. I think I started with Lincoln's election, and then I started reading through. And I started reading through the newspapers. They're only 4 pages long in that era, and 2 of those pages are advertising. So it sounds more impressive than it really was. So I'm reading through this, and I'm living the war. And I got mesmerized by it, and I read through lunch. And I'm learning all this stuff that I had never heard about. Island Number 10 is huge during the Civil War. I'd never heard about it. You started seeing patterns against stuff I've never written about and probably never will, but there was story after story of immigrant girls dying from botched abortions, which is, I took tons of notes on it later. But you start to see patterns. And I'm reading through, and I'm living the war, the terrible, terrible columns of dead. And thinking of, being a mom and waiting, hearing that there's a battle, but then having to wait till these lists come out, And I'm reading it, and I have not eaten all day, and it's cold, and it's very dark because you're reading microfilm. So I'm the only one down there. The librarians were fabulous, but it was not what one would call a heavily utilized area. So. Actually, the one person I saw there on quite a regular basis, we never spoke, was John Updike. So it'd be me and John Updike down there. It was not that day, it was just me. And now that they've moved them upstairs, there are more people in them. So I'm reading through, and then I read through dinner, because it's a lot of years here, and I'm reading through each edition. And I'm going through, and the war is getting bloodier and bloodier, and we're looking at the Wilderness Campaign, and Grant is now in charge, and the March to the Sea, and I'm all reading through the Chicago Tribune, and I'm just totally mesmerized by it, and we get to Appomattox, and Lee surrenders. And of course, I knew the story, but I mean, I was in the moment, right? And I turned it and Lee surrenders, and I'm like, oh my God, we won. This is amazing. And then, by then, it's really quite late. I've been at this all day without eating. And I'm turning the crank, and we're celebrating, and there's the bands and all this. And then I turn the crank. It's the Chicago Tribune, remember, who lived in Illinois. I turn the crank, and there's a black border around the newspaper. And they had shot Lincoln. And I was like, oh my God, they've killed my president. And I went home that night. I mean, I was devastated. And I read a little bit further on, and I went home, and I wrote to my mother, and I said, I know what I'm going to do with my life. I'm going to make history come as alive for everybody else as it has come alive for me. And when she died, that letter was still by her bed.
That is an amazing story.
So my students think that the reason I'm a good teacher is because I hated college. So I'm like, yeah, bring your lunch, no problem, and if you feel like you're getting bored, let me know. And
that is an amazing story. It's like it just touched me so deeply, and I can tell it's still when you even retelling it, it's touching you even now. So, to the next question: if you could witness any historical event firsthand, purely as an observer, which one would it be and why?
Can I meet someone instead?
Yeah, absolutely.
Booker T. Washington. And the reason for that is because I've read, he was a major character in one of my books. And, but the caveat is they have to be willing to talk to me honestly. And that's a big caveat with him. Because I think he was a genius. And I think he was extraordinarily courageous. It was very easy for people who were living in Massachusetts, for example, to talk about race relations in the South in Massachusetts. Every morning when he walked out of his house, he did not know if there was going to be a bullet between his shoulder blades. But by God, he did it. And I think he was too smart, maybe, for his time. But we also know that for all of his apparent attempts to soothe the white population amongst which he lived, he was also secretly funding anti-lynching efforts. And I am fascinated by somebody like that who lives between two worlds and literally has the courage to fight for democracy every day under those kind of circumstances. And we tend to think of him as a thinker, or we tend to think of him as a scholar, or sometimes we think of him as a politician. But when you put that whole package together, I think maybe I wouldn't want to meet him because I'd be disappointed, but I think he was probably one of the most courageous people we have ever had in this country. And I just think it would be fascinating if he would honestly tell me how he negotiated all those different roles at once. And I don't think you can do that without an extraordinary brain. And it would just be cool to talk to that.
So my final question, and then I'm going to open it up to the audience. If you have a question, think about it. So what gives you hope right now as a historian and as an American?
The American people. It's always the American people. I think I maybe anticipated stuff a little bit too early with Democracy Awakening because I thought I was seeing this extraordinary outpouring of defense of American principles. But when I look around today at the people pouring into the streets now, millions of people already pouring into the streets, but also working in all the ways that you people work, working at the state level, working at the local level to, if you don't want to run for the school board, sitting in at school board meetings so that, people who are advocating policies you care about feel secure, showing up for town meetings, running for office. I'm not going to give any names here, but 4 people that I happen to know, not in my state, who were on the sidelines of politics but close to them have announced their candidacies for different offices in the last week. And I was like, I feel pretty good about that. And then it turned out they all knew each other, too. And I'm like, now I'm feeling a little weird about that. But people are stepping up to the plate, and they are talking about not policies, but about principles. And when Americans start to talk about principles, they tend to reorder this country in really important and progressive ways. And so, like I say, everybody and his brother wants me to come on their show to talk about 100 Days of Trump. And I shouldn't say this because we're being recorded, and maybe somebody will take this story. I want to write a story about the first 100 days of the American people under Trump. Isn't that a cool idea?
And we look forward to reading that. So I am going to ask people to come forward. Levante, could you hold on to the mic and people can come forward to ask questions? What I would like you not to do is do a speech beforehand. I'd like you to ask the question, and keep in mind we'd like to get as many people as possible to ask questions, so keep that in mind when you're asking the question. And
Thank you. So what is it, and I love that you asked about hope, but what is it that you're most scared of? People are scared that we're not going to have another legitimate election. That's what I hear most.
That's a real concern, that we will not have a legitimate election, another legitimate election. And this is because of for example, the SAVE Act, for all the number of places in the states that people are trying to cut back on voting. I will point out, and I think this is really important for people to understand and to internalize, that for the millionth time, this is not the traditional Republican Party. It got taken over by a small group of people who call themselves movement conservatives, and now they have become MAGA. This is not the way the Republicans always were, but they began to get power beginning in 1986 when they recognized that what they were talking about was not popular around the country, and they began voter suppression and stacking the courts in 1986. So we have had extraordinary voter suppression throughout the last, I can't do the math, almost 40 years. And we've also had, after the 2020 election, I think it's off the top of my head, 34 states put in new voter suppression laws. So, every time I see an article that says, why don't black people show up to vote? And they say they must be unhappy about something. I'm like, have you read no history at all? Because this is what we know of as voter suppression. So this is not entirely new, but if you are looking for places to put your energy, that's the place that I would put it. And of course, there are a number of people fighting back against it. There's Democracy Docket with Mark Elias, this is the front lines, but people are doing it throughout the states. Absolutely a place to put energy because, as you were saying before, Russia has elections. We just know who's going to win them. And the American South had elections. We just knew who was going to win them. And that's something really, really to push on and to especially if anybody's here listening from North Carolina who has connections in North Carolina, this is why there's still that fight over that judge in North Carolina. This is why Elon Musk said that the election in Wisconsin was going to determine the fate of human civilization. That's because he did, with that cheese on his head. This is one of the things that we will have to do going forward is to unrig the system because it has been rigged. In a free and fair election, I have zero doubt that we would have a Democratic House, a Democratic Senate, a Democratic president, and a Democratic-leaning Supreme Court.
Hi. My question is about the suppression of facts and actual, truth that's being put against our universities, against our cultural institutions like the Kennedy Center, and especially against the Smithsonian Institution. And what can we do? How can we push back and protect those institutions?
I'm really glad you asked that, because this is another place where there are picking away in different, looks like picking away in different places, but it's a plan. So, and it's not, this is not secret. You know, one of the things that I find very frustrating is because so much is out in the open, people don't think it's real. You can read this stuff. I don't have any like hotline to some secret well of information. If you think about the White House today, you've got Trump, who is seemingly vaguely there, but then you have three factions that are struggling to use the power that the White House has. There's the Stephen Miller faction, which is the anti-immigrant group. There are the tech bros, the broligarchy, which is trying to use the power of the government to garner all the power themselves and money themselves. There's another big contract headed Elon Musk's way. And then there are the Project 2025 people. Project 2025 is being implemented through the Office of Management and Budget, which is where Russell Vogt is. And Russell Vogt is one of the authors of Project 2025. And he was also an advisor to the House Freedom Caucus and so on. And you have to understand that with those three groups, the Miller set, the anti-immigrant set, wants a really strong government right now to do things like end our judges, right? So they're doing that. But the other two groups want to destroy the American government. They don't want to reform it and put a Republican where a Democrat was. They need to destroy it. The oligarchs need to, the tech oligarchs need to destroy it so they can amass money and run their businesses the way they want to without regulation. So if you read, for example, Peter Thiel writes about this, Elon Musk has written about it, but obviously Curtis Yarvin is all over this and so forth, all these people who think about the tech bro group, and there's a lot of people writing about this now. They want to get rid of the regulations that they believe are hampering their ability to create the technological world that they want, either on this planet or on Mars, which itself is, that's actually really an interesting thing, because that's a vision of humanity that suggests that many of us can be utilized in such a way that it will enable a very small group of us to begin interplanetary travel to save humanity, meaning that the rest of us are not going to be part of that. That's a different kettle of fish. But so they want to get rid of the government for that. The government for that. They don't care that. Musk doesn't care about immigration. He wants more immigration. You know, and he wants free trade. He doesn't want, the other stuff that you're seeing implemented by the third group. And the third group are the Project 2025 people. And those are the ones that believe that the modern American polity, the world in which we live, has been thoroughly corrupted by liberalism. And by liberalism, I think they don't quite understand what liberalism is. Liberalism is an attempt to defend the rights and liberties of the individual. And beginning at the beginning of the 20th century, Theodore Roosevelt switched the idea of liberalism from talking about a small government that stays out of the way of individuals to talking about a bigger government that protects individuals from the overreach of industry. So liberalism is still that philosophical idea of protecting the rights of the individual as opposed to some other forms of government. But in the United States, it means having a government strong enough to say, no, you can't actually explode a space rocket in an airplane zone, which, I don't know, seems pretty good to me. So that Project 2025 and those people believe that all aspects of modern America are corrupt. And they are not like people taking money, but they are rotten because they were formed under a liberal system, this liberal democracy. So they are not just taking down the government. They are working to take down business. They are working to take down culture. They are working to take down education. They are working to take down all the aspects of American society down to the ground so they can be rebuilt without that liberalism so they can be rebuilt, in their case, along the lines of a theocracy. So the attacks on the Kennedy Center and the many different places you see the attacks on culture are part of that larger impulse to get rid of all of that stuff. And when you think about the attacks on the universities, they're talking about anti-Semitism, but quite literally, Trump pardoned a guy who showed up on January 6th with a T-shirt that said something about how the Holocaust was great. That's not a direct translation, but it's not about anti-Semitism. It's about trying to get control over the universities, clean them out, and rebuild them, the same way they did with New College of Florida, which is now just spiraling into death, as near as I can tell, because what they did is they put cronies in charge of it, and they sucked money out of it, and nobody wants to go there, nobody wants to teach there, and the whole thing's falling apart. It's an attempt, I think, sort of to Dogeify the university systems. And more power to the universities. Harvard standing up really mattered. And there is a spreadsheet you can be following of all the other universities who are now in a compact so that they will stand up as well. And it's growing by the hour. I think we're up to 380 something. And the one would hope that other institutions will do the same. So the way to support those people is by calling it out, by saying we want you to stand up, and we all have to stand together. What is it that Franklin said? We all have to we must hang together, or we shall assuredly all hang separately. And this is one of those moments to support those people. As for, are we ever going to get our culture back? I think it's going to be better, because one of the things in this moment that I'm seeing is extraordinary outpourings of art and music and literature and new languages and new people. And all of those things are so vital to creating a cohesive and vibrant culture that I actually think maybe it's not going to be a bad thing to have shaken a lot of these, not the Kennedy Center, but to have said, let's rethink this, let's bring in new voices. And that, if we hold to that, we could end up in a better place than we have been.
Hi. Just building on that last comment. At the beginning, you said that you saw some opportunity in the crisis we face now. What specifically, in addition to what you're just saying about the arts, do you see opportunity for us to do, and how should we prepare now to do that?
That's a great question, because everybody's focused on how bad the Trump administration is and everything they're upset about, which is very important to focus on. Here's what, you asked what worried me, wherever you are, you asked what worried me. And this is weird to be worried about. There are many things I worry about. My husband is here, by the way, Buddy is here. And I mentioned my copy editor who makes the magic happen. That's right. She doesn't know I'm going to say this. She's never missed a letter. Once they started, I'm so sorry. I shouldn't say this. Could I say this? Can I tell them what you did the other day? Yes. She had surgery. And I said, that's it. I'm not sending you the letter. And she said, as soon as I'm off the anesthesia, I'll do it. And she did. Yeah. She's a total goddess. So I was going to say, Buddy will tell you I worry about a lot, and he has to listen to it. I couldn't do these things without him. But cosmically, what worries me is this. The Trump administration is destroying a lot, and they're throwing everything into chaos, and that's deliberate. And I do not know what's going to happen in this world. I don't know what's going to happen in an hour. I am not one of those people who is convinced that the Trump administration is going to win. I could be wrong. I mean, this could be the last time we ever get to talk. But that's not what things look like to me. I think we're entering a period of extraordinary confusion and extraordinary dislocation. And what I see is the need for people to articulate what they want on the other side. Because what we do not want is for the chaos and the destruction to happen, and then for the people who are currently in power to walk away and say, good luck with that. We need to make sure we have in place the arguments for and the ideas about what we want going forward. And we're not all going to agree on those. We're going to need to put them to people and to see what we want. But I would urge people to think about that as well. What's important to you? I mean, what's important to me is probably not what's important to you. But I can sit here and I can reel off a bunch of things that I really would like to have. We got to end gerrymandering. We got to make voting free and fair. I want to get rid of the George W. Bush tax cuts and the Donald Trump tax cuts. That's me. I want universal health care. I want to invest in education. The ERA is a no-brainer. But all of these things are things that you need to think about now. And, because what we tend to do in the United States is we don't do anything for a really long time, and then our system kind of gets, outdated. I mean, I want solar. I want clean energy. I want to address climate change. I want to address common sense gun reform. All that kind of stuff. But our system, and by the way, those are not fringe policies. Every single thing I said, the vast majority of Americans wants. So what we tend to do is we tend to have a polity that, or not a polity, a system that gets sclerotic. It tends to get, it's not responding very well. And then all of a sudden we're like, we got to fix stuff. And then we do in a hurry, and we do a lot. And when that moment comes, what we don't want is for people casting around going, oh, I don't know, what do you think? We want people to say, here's our agenda, and here's how we're going to implement it. And I'm not the implementation part, but think about the populists in the 1890s. So in 1890, we get the alliance movement, where the two parties are not adequately addressing the needs of Americans in the industrialization, the age of industrialization. And so the alliance movement, which starts as a popular movement, I said you took a look at the 1890s in the era of new media, they start to publish newspapers that are utterly ephemeral. The ones from South Dakota, where this whole movement started, there are none left. They're all gone, which breaks my heart. But people started talking about what they wanted. What did they want? And by the way, just so you know, going forward, some of the people they made common cause with were pretty awful. But they carried forward the idea that we needed direct election of senators. We needed an income tax. We needed to lower the tariffs. We needed to do a whole series of things that were really popular, and they gain momentum, and they become the Populist Party, and the Populist Party gets taken over by the Democrats. And by the early 20th century, you have people like Theodore Roosevelt, who's a Republican, saying, I better do some of this stuff, or otherwise I'm never going to win political office. And by 1912, every single candidate running for office, all three of them, because there was one running as a socialist, 1912 Eugene V. Debs of Indiana. I saw somebody wearing an Indiana shirt here. Are all embracing all those policies, and they're all in the Constitution or in the law by the early 20th century. So that's how you do it. What you don't do is say, let's tear it all down and hope somebody comes up with something on the other side. Because at that point, if everything's been torn down and there's not a plan, people tend, in other countries at least, to go to a strong man. And we've been very lucky because Trump is falling apart. If he were 40 and smart, we'd have a real problem.
Thank you. I'm going to follow up a little bit on what's been said. I'm really curious about this idea of people articulating what they want. And I often find myself in crowds like this, where we are, for the most part, like-minded and think alike. And this crowd is making no judgments on people's age, but I think we skew a little bit older. So how do we have these conversations across lines of differences, and from people in my generation and older, how are we bringing young people, particularly those that may not live on the coast or the Washington, D.C. area or wherever? How do we start to have those conversations across lines of differences? And thank you for being here, and I'm especially glad to meet Buddy because I share a love of Midcoast Maine.
I'm really glad you asked that or said that. And just, I'm not an oracle. I will do the best I can, and I read a lot, and I talk to people, and I listen. So maybe I know some stuff, maybe I don't. I think it's really cool that this is an old people's movement so far in the streets. And let me talk a little bit about that before I talk about other groups. Because so far the people showing up in the streets are overwhelmingly old and white. That's good. Why is that good? Because it's going to be very, very hard for Trump to convince his voters that we are Antifa. And I'm not kidding. I'm not kidding. If you're talking about the Insurrection Act or violence against people, they have been nonviolent. They are usually over by nighttime. And that's, I'm like, you guys are laughing, but if you're organizing, that matters. You do not want people in the streets after nighttime because bad things happen at night. With just for everybody. I mean, I was joking. We just had the anniversary of Paul Revere's ride, and Samuel Prescott ends up with Revere and Dawes because he's coming home from a woman's house at 1:30 at night. And Buddy and I were talking about that. I was like, you tell your kids, nothing good happens after midnight. What was he doing? But that is now our role. And let me say something about that I think is totally cool. We are the first generation of Americans and the first generation of women to have 20 to 30 years after our careers and after our children leave home to reinvent ourselves. And we don't know how to do that. There are books about how to be a kid. There are books about how to be a teenager. There are books about going to college. There are books about careers. There's books about, retirement. There are no books about, here's 30 more years in your life. And one of the things that it seems to me is going on is people are waking up and saying, you know what I want to do? I want to give a better world to my children and my grandchildren than I had. I met a woman than they have now. I met a woman in an airport, and we were talking about this, and she was elderly, like significantly elderly, and elegantly dressed woman. And I talked to her about this theory that comes from a friend of mine, and I think it's right. And she said, well, I decided that 20 years ago. I decided that I was going to spend the rest of my life becoming a good ancestor. I want my great-great-grandchildren to be proud that I am in their family tree. And I was like, you go, girl. I'm going to do that, too. So I don't, one of the things we keep talking about is involving younger people. Let me talk about that in a second. It's really important that we involve a lot of older people. And we are, and we can do better at that because we should be the ones out there in front of the younger, especially male people of color who are in danger. This is now our job to stand up and say, you know what, we'll take care of this so that you're not the ones who are on the other side. But back to that question, though, the organizing that you're seeing in the streets is not the only organizing that's going on at all. And people are organizing over social media, large numbers of people organizing social media to affect local races and state races that are so important, to work to protect schools, to work to protect school boards, and so on. So that's all going on. And just because we don't see it doesn't mean it's not happening among other groups. Now, the youth are organizing in a different way. And the youth are actually very involved in what's going on as well. And they are also organizing. They're organizing politically in really interesting and important ways. They're definitely out there. If you are interested in making sure that your younger people are interested, talk to them. because we have influence in their lives, especially young men who are in that very vulnerable age of being co-opted into the MAGA movement by the podcasts or the YouTube channels or gaming. And not all gaming is bad, by the way, but finding out what they're listening to and what they're thinking about. We have more influence on them than our peers do. So, than their peers do. So that would be a place to follow that. But I'm actually not unhappy with personally, I'm not unhappy with where we are in this. Because, again, we tend to be invisible, especially older women, and people tend not to think a lot about us, but we vote in the highest proportions of anybody in the country.
Hi. So I want to thank you from the bottom of my soul for your essays. I have decreased my media access for mental health reasons, and yours is the way I access most of my information. And so that brings me to my question is, how are you maintaining your own mental health as you do all of this research and whatnot?
Well, I mentioned Buddy was here, Buddy's my rock. But so for me, something, first of all, about the letters, just so you know, when you think I'm making a joke really subtly, I am. And you can tell it if you listen to me read the letters. I let it really rip there. But I do try and put that stuff in. I don't do that. I used to have inside jokes. I don't do that much anymore because the audience is so big that people are writing to me like, what do you mean about that? I'm like, never mind. So for me, I need to understand things. That nothing stresses me out more than not understanding. I want to know stuff. I want to have the ground under my feet with facts. So for me, writing the letters is my mental health. If I don't understand what's happening, like right now, I'm not happy about this, aside from the situation itself, I'm not happy about this judge thing because I don't understand it yet. I haven't read the documents. Once I've read the documents, I can say, oh, that's what happened. And then I can walk away. I don't have to think about it any longer. So for me, my mental health is supported by writing and I mediate the world through words. In fact, you're about to see that my fabulous team has been working on another project as well. And that, to me, it shapes the world in such a way that I can manage it. Whereas if stuff is just happening, I can ignore it. Ask me about American football. But if it involves my life and I have to know and I have to understand it to make good decisions about my life, I have to understand it, and researching and writing helps me to understand it so that I'm like, okay, now I get it. I don't have to think about it anymore. So thank you for asking, but so far, so good.
Do you need something?
I know we're trying to wrap this up.
No,
So as you've discussed, Trump's been attacking every factor of society, universities all over the place. I have a question about the DC Bar Association. You're aware of what's going on with the DC Bar Association. The elections are currently ongoing, and they've been extended to June 6th, so if anybody here is a DC Bar member, please vote before then. Pam Bondi's brother is running for president. And the interim U.S. Attorney, Ed Martin, Trump's choice, his protege, Elisa Long, is running for treasurer. And so I was wondering if you knew if they were doing this in the other state bar associations, if they're trying to take over control of the state bar associations because they're attacking the law firms and the lawyers and the judges, and this is another way they're trying to get in to take control.
I would be shocked if they aren't.
I would too.
But so one of the things that is happening is that this very small faction of people has managed to seize key positions in our government. And once people know it's happening, they don't want it. So this is a great place to make sure people know. And how do you make people know? Any of the things you're caring about, not just the DC bar, but social media is your enemy, but it's also your friend. this is a place where you could lay that out exactly as you did. But also, one of the things that people are doing now, and that I'm a big proponent of, are short videos on social media, so that you blanket a space with that information so people know that it's happening. And again, I'd be shocked if people didn't know, but I would also be shocked if most attorneys didn't know that it was happening as well.
Well, right, and so many attorneys, I mean, I'm one, obviously, because I know about this, have never voted in the DC bar.
Now's the time.
And they're trying to get everybody to vote in the DC bar election.
So,
Never been that high, and that's just 20.
okay, so if you're a member of the DC bar, or know anybody who's a member of the DC bar, or has any influence on anybody who's a member of the DC bar, speak up about it, because, you know, just exactly the way she put it, Pam Bondi's brother, end of discussion. Well, no, but you know, when people knew about Project 2025, 4% of Americans liked it. If they knew about it, 4% of them said they liked it. 96% said, that's not for me. What do? We elected somebody who's putting Project 2025 in place. And once people know, they do the right thing.
First, I want to say thank you. Thank you for your letters, and thank you for annotating everything so we can continue to promote critical thought. And so my question, pardon, I had to write it down. What effect do you think the lack of the fairness doctrine plays in the inability to get good information out to the masses to combat the disinformation as new media sources appear so that we can have civil discourse with folks who disagree?
Great question, but it's a two-parter. The fairness doctrine was in place in the United States after the turn of the last century. Really interesting, because we had extraordinarily polarized media in the late 19th century, and people were so disgusted by it, they really pushed the idea of an independent media that simply presented the facts without editorial commentary in news stories. There were always editorials, but the news section was different. That, of course, has led us into the place where we are now in many ways, because presenting both sides of a story in this case makes it impossible for people to understand the larger picture of what's going on. That's a different story. But we get the fairness doctrine when we get the rise of radio. You can't have a public broadcast license unless you agree to base your news in facts, your editorials in facts, and to present both sides of a question. Do you remember Gilda Radner in Saturday Night Live when she did the counterpoint? And she has, you know, I always think of her defending youth in Asia. And gosh, it was it Rosanna Dana? Yeah. That's what she was doing. That was the fairness doctrine. And that faction that took over the Republican Party, the movement conservatives, hated the fairness doctrine because their arguments were not based in evidence. They were based in religion and ideology, and so they insisted they were not getting equal time on the media. And you see this in the 1971 Lewis Powell memo, in which he talks about, for the U.S. Chamber of Commerce, in which he talks about how you can get rid of these ideas of regulation and the other forms of the New Deal government that business leaders don't want, is you need to take back the pillars of society, because they have all embraced liberalism. And that's not Democrats, that's the entire system. Republicans, independents, and Democrats alike embraced the ideas of the New Deal, and that you need to take back the law, you need to take back the legal profession, the schools, and the media. And so the movement conservatives put pressure on Reagan, who was, of course, sympathetic to them and part of their movement, really the leader of their movement in some ways, to change the makeup of the Federal Communications Commission and to stack it with people who would get rid of the fairness doctrine. So they get rid of the fairness doctrine in 1987, and when they do that, it's very good timing in the sense that you're getting the rise then of FM radio eclipsing AM radio. FM has a higher quality of sound, so music is moving to FM radio. AM radio then is looking for some kind of a way to make money. They turn to talk shows. Talk shows need a much lower quality of sound. And they realize very quickly that many people started as shock jocks, because that gets ears, but people like Rush Limbaugh, who did not start as a political shock jock, recognized that politics is the way to get people to listen to their talk shows. So you get, in 1988, you've got Rush Limbaugh really taking off, and of course that is going to roll into taking this idea into media, and you get the rise of the Fox News Channel, or the creation of the Fox News Channel in 1996, I think it is, maybe 97, I think it's 96. And with that, you get this beginning of a creation of an entirely alternative media. Now, that's a problem, but here's the other thing. None of those places have, none of the modern forms of communication have broadcast licenses. I don't have a broadcast license because cable and the internet means you don't have to have a broadcast license. So what do you do when you can't say you can't have the license unless you do what I say? And Trump is now trying to hold this over CBS, for example. I'm going to take away your license. But one of the things we could do, and one of the things that I would put on my wish list going forward to restore the idea of a town square or a town where ideas get heard, is not to change what can be said, because that's the First Amendment, and I'm a huge believer in the First Amendment, but to change the algorithms. Because what we're seeing is the privileging of bots and trolls and the amplification through phone farms of the right-wing fake voices. And I would also get rid of the system by which the Fox News Channel became as popular as it is. Fox News does not live by advertising. This is why you can complain all you want, and it does not matter if all that's showing up on Sean Hannity is advertisements for mattresses made of hay. Their money comes from cable fees. They had the highest, last I checked, they had the highest cut of cable fees other than ESPN. And, that should not be the case. We should not have to pay for the Fox News Channel in order to have cable. So that, getting rid of that sort of thing would, I think, go a long way to restoring a public discourse. People talk about bringing the fairness doctrine back, but again, without the government being able to find a way, which you could have under the Biden administration's idea of providing internet carrying capacity into rural areas. That might have been a way in. That seems like it's being cut. I'm not sure, and I'm not a lawyer. I'm not sure how you would do that, but the algorithms are a no-brainer. The European Union is doing it right now, and also changing, of course, who's liable for the kind of stuff that shows up on sites might go a long way. I agree with you, it needs to be addressed. I'm not sure the fairness doctrine would do anything for us now because of the cable and the internet.
So I just want to take a minute, just let you know it's 7:57. I don't know if you have time to take another question or not.
I will.
Okay.
And then everybody, I always look, people like to go 5 minutes over, but no more. Because they're like, God, this is great. And then they're like, I got to get home.
And before I go to the next question, I just want to recognize that our Montgomery County Executive, Mark Elrich, is here with us.
Hi, thank you again for tonight. This question might make people squirm, but do you see a realistic path forward that involves nonviolence? Because looking backwards at historical moments like the labor rights movement and the civil rights movement, there was a lot of violence. And I think a lot of people on our side like to gloss over that fact that a lot of people died for where we are right now and for our rights. And we also like to gloss over the fact that I don't want to call them the other side, but the conservative sphere is very pro-violence, I mean, they had the target signs on elected officials from Sarah Palin, and that the calls for violence have only mounted. So I don't see a peaceful way out, and maybe you do, and maybe you have historical anecdotes or events that you could point to. Thank you.
So here's what I would say to that, and that is, as I like to say, the future is unwritten. We do not know what is going to happen. And that is, I think, a moment of great opportunity, because first of all, let me leave that there and then say we are in a time of extraordinary violence right now. And not just the things that show up in the news, the mass school shootings, for example, but also, domestic violence. More than 50% of our mass shootings are domestic violence. And nobody ever talks about that, but I promise you the historians will. And one of the things that I think is interesting about the late 19th century is that there was a lot of violence, especially around labor. And, did people who were living through that era know it? And I think maybe they did because it showed up in the newspaper all the time. But I promise you, in 150 years, somebody is going to turn to their mom and say, did they know they were living through a period of such extraordinary violence? And the answer is a lot of Americans don't. They think the way we are living is normal, and it is not. So the violence is already here, I would say, but I think that's not what you're asking. I think you're asking about this political moment. And what I would say is that I do not know what the future is going to hold, but I do not think that we are in a moment where we know that that's going to come. And what I would point you to is the fact that if you look at the Civil War, which is what everybody looks at in this moment, the way that the politicians got to a shooting war was quite literally this is going to take a little bit more than 5 minutes. Is that okay? Okay. So South Carolina was the only state in the Union that chose its electors by the legislature. So the legislature was actually sitting when Lincoln was elected. So they're sitting there, and what do? They reconvene themselves as a secession conference, and they secede from the Union. Now, they were South Carolina, and they had to get other people around with them. And what they do is they were supporters of the Breckinridge campaign, and he was the far-right dude who just wanted to have slavery everywhere as long as he could. And they turned their campaign into a secession campaign. And quick like bunnies, they got all those, not all the southern states, but the deep states to secede without putting it to a vote. Or if they put it to a vote, they put it to a vote in certain counties and not others. And they essentially railroaded the South out of the Union. And they shut down anybody who said anything different, and they managed to get their states out of the Union. But then, nothing happened. Like, they had seceded by, December. And Lincoln wasn't going to take office for another 3 months. And, it was Christmas season, and they're all like, yeah, we're going to go fight. This is going to be great. And then nothing happened. And people are like, well, let's think about this. And they get less and less enthusiastic about secession, and then it's planting season. And they're like, I can't secede. I got to plant my fields. And they managed essentially to create a shooting war by creating a shooting war. And one of the ways that they do that is by making sure that nobody has good information, that they create a world in which Lincoln keeps saying, dudes, take a chill pill. I'm not doing anything. That's paraphrased. But he says, I'm not going to interfere with your states. We need to speak to the better angels of our nature. They shut all that off. They make sure nobody knows what's going on. And then once the shooting war starts, the calculations all change, because then you're in it, right? But one of the things that I see as incredibly hopeful in this moment is people are paying attention to real news. And that's not the MAGAs. You're never going to get, there's going to be 20 to 33% of Americans who are in. That's it, they're done. But it's those middle people who are going to have the weight to switch us one way or the other, and they seem to me to be paying attention. If we do this, if we get out in the streets, if we support the lawyers who are standing up, if we support the universities, if we support the businesses who are in fact defending democracy, if we make our weight so obvious that it becomes better for a politician to go for our votes versus MAGA votes, or if we make it so that it's clear that if you're going to try to conduct a business or to run a school or whatever, that you need us, there's so many of us, I don't think we're going to have a shooting war. I think what we will have is pockets of violence like we have had before. And if you've noticed, the pockets of political violence have significantly decreased since Trump got elected. So what we could see is those increasing as those people feel like they're losing power. But, one of the things we're also seeing is a number of MAGA supporters are so upset about the tariffs that they're backing away from him. So I don't think it's inevitable at this point. I don't think I can say it's never going to happen, but we still have the time to write a different future for this country. And it looks to me like we're doing it.
So much. I'm so sorry. I'll be very brief. A lot of people have been talking about, it's almost unanimous how you see people talking about how great the courts are and how the courts are really showing up and coming forward. But my big fear is that he's not going to listen to the Supreme Court. He's not going to listen to any court. And we don't have any, what happens then? There's, law enforcement, nope. Where does that go next?
Remember, moving target, that things are changing. So it's not just the courts that are in this fight. You can sit. there's a chair right there, actually. If you can, when you think about what's going on, try to think big picture. I know that's kind of my bailiwick, is the big picture stuff. And the little picture stuff is terrifying. There's a lot. I don't mean to say this is a smooth sail at all. But we're in this struggle now, and we cannot go back to it. This country is never going back to January 19th, 2025. That world is gone. We're on this journey, and we have got to get to the other side somehow. And this is one of the reasons I'm in it 100%, because if I crawl under my desk, it's still going to be out there. I just won't be able to have an effect on how it happens. So the courts are... Many of them are holding their own, and as I say, that they may continue to do stuff. What if he ignores them? Well, Trump is not in a good position politically right now. He is, the Fox News channel, which, by the way, their polling is quite good. Like that's a different kettle of fish, their polling. The polls are terrible. The Fox News channel, the Fox News recent poll had him below where he was in his first term. This is why he's now talking about getting rid of Fox. The tariffs are a disaster. They are just a complete freaking disaster. And they haven't hit yet. So one of the things that you asked me what keeps me up at night, the numbers of freighters coming into the Port of Los Angeles for the month of May are down 44%. That's not just stuff that's not going to show up at Amazon. That's trucking, that's trains, that's handlers, that's stores, that's just one port. So if he's in bad shape now, May is not that far along. And that's not the only thing. He's now underwater on immigration as well. He had two things that were going for him, the economy and immigration, and both of those he's underwater. By underwater, it means more people disapprove than approve. You'd never want to be underwater, and he's underwater on every single thing, including those two things. So what does that mean if he doesn't accept it? Well, right now, I don't think he really has a good idea of what's going on. He's deferring to his legal counsel. I don't know who Pam Bondi's taken orders from, but the thing about immigration and the judges looks to me like Stephen Miller. I don't know, but it sure looks to me like Stephen Miller. Maybe Bannon, it's two. But I don't know. I'm not privy to that. But so now think about it. If you're a Congress critter, a Republican Congress critter, or especially a senator, and you're watching this guy tanking, the Defense Department is in tatters, and that really matters. That's what a government does. It keeps us safe. And the defense secretary is relying on his wife, his brother, and two low-level officials to conduct the safety of the United States of America. This is dangerous beyond belief. We are in such danger in this country. And something's going to happen. Not necessarily in this country, but the Defense Department is in tatters. The economy, which 3 months ago was the envy of the world, is already in tatters, and the tariffs haven't hit. The bond market is dropping. People are ceasing to treat the United States of America as a safe haven, which is going to change everything because we're not going to be able to borrow cheaply any longer because we're no longer the safe haven. If you're a congressperson looking at this and trying to decide whether you're going to try and pick up MAGA voters who have never been proven to turn out for anybody but Donald Trump, who's not going to run in 2028 because he's not going to have a brain left at all at that point. And I'm dead serious. This man's not in good shape. Are you going to support him, or are you going to find a way to move him off stage? And I don't know, because I'm not a Republican senator, and I'm never going to be a Republican senator. But it is significant, I think, that there have been, I don't know if you saw the interview that I did with Angus King, Senator Angus King, the other day. That shocked me. Did you see me like... For him to come out and speak that way, I thought he was putting pressure on the Republican senators. I thought that was about that. I thought he had done that deliberately to put pressure on the Republican senators. So what happens if Trump doesn't agree to what the courts say? I don't know. I mean, but given everything I just told you, do you think it's a done deal? I mean, that's where every day I sit there and I look at it and I think, well, that news is not great. But again, if I'm a Republican senator, why would I side with this guy? He doesn't really have political power anymore. He's ruined our defense. He's ruined our economy. He's breaking the law. He's trying to get rid of Congress. He's going after the courts. I'm thinking the calculation is getting pretty clear that it might be time to find a different way to remain in power, because the Republicans, most of the Republicans in the Senate are not MAGA. They're Republicans. And they are going along with this because they wanted the MAGA voters, and they wanted the tax cuts and the deregulation. They didn't want to get rid of Congress. They didn't want to get rid of U.S. aid. They didn't want to side with Russia. They didn't want to get rid of, the weather department. They didn't want to get rid of funding for cancer research. They didn't want any of that stuff. So I'm not really worried about Trump not obeying the courts. And I think if you listen to him saying, well, I don't know anything about this, this is all my advisors, that's him saying, I don't know what they're doing, but I don't want to be part of it. So that's not something I'm losing sleep over. But, we'll see what the next day brings. I just want to end finally by thanking you all for everything that you're doing. And this is now, I think, a movement, and we are a different movement than we've ever seen in America before, but that's a very cool moment to be part of. But I also want to thank you personally, because I'd like more sleep. There's no doubt about it. But I am the luckiest person in the world to get to keep a record of this country in this extraordinary time. And I feel like I have had the opportunity to be what I think of as the coffee pot that so many of you people are growing, are gathering around and creating organizations around and creating friendships around and creating community around. And I never forget that every night when I sit down at that computer, that I get to do it because of you all. And I thank you for that. I thank you for being there and for reading, because my half is the writing part, but yours is the reading half. And thank you for letting me be part of the movement that you all have built and are creating to see if maybe we finally get the opportunity to make this country what it really could be. And I'm thrilled and proud to be part of it, and I thank you for letting me do it. And thank you for having me here tonight.
So glad you were able to come and join us. Yeah. So do you have everything? This is Heather. Heather? Oh, sure.
You gotta get home.